Hi, this is Stephanie Crowder, and I want to welcome you to the first of 3 installments as we discuss what is theological field education here at Chicago Theological Seminary. In this first installment, we'll just discuss in general what is theological field education. The second video will talk specifically about field placement, the requirement that MDiv and MARL students have to complete those 400 hours either in a parish setting or church setting or in a community-based organization. And then in the third installment, we'll talk specifically about clinical pastoral education, or the CPE experience. And so again, this is the first of 3 installments as we begin our time talking about what do we mean by theological field education at Chicago Theological Seminary. Let me give you a little background information about me. I was born and nurtured in Memphis, Tennessee, grew up Baptist, grew up National Baptist, attended Howard University. From Howard University, went on to United Theological Seminary. And it was really at United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, where I had my first field ed experience. My very first year, I served as youth minister in a church. And for me, I just thought it was just a way to check the field ed box off of my matriculation process. But it's been interesting because there are students and people that I met in that field placement experience years and years ago who I am still in contact with to this very day. I said all of that to say that you just never know what could happen as a result of engaging in theological field education. We may go into it thinking, oh, it's just something else I have to do in order to get this MARL degree or get this MDiv degree, but you will be amazed at the connections and the relationships that you could possibly make as a result of those experiences. Once I finished United Seminary, I went on to Vanderbilt, received a PhD in Biblical Studies, and taught for a number of years in various undergraduate institutions, also taught at the graduate level in various seminaries. While along the way, I also had experience as an HIV/AIDS program director, and also did some program associate work with the American Diabetes Association. And again, you just never know where life is going to take you. So as you think about vocation and calling and where it is God is calling you to be, I would ask that you have a sense of openness and a sense of possibility, that you approach it as who knows where God could lead. I ended up having a career in faith and ways in which faith and health began to overlap in some regards. And I'm bringing much of that experience to bear now as I begin to work with students who are trying to discern what it is that God wants them to do and how God wants them to serve in this world. So again, broach theological field education, broach your theological experience in general of openness and with a degree of possibility. Make sure there's some reflection and that you begin to really think and prayerfully consider what it is that God would have you do and where God would best have you use your gifts and resources. You'll be amazed that sometimes where you think you're going to end up is perhaps not the place where you will end up. And that's the beauty, I think, of having this theological journey, that God is as big and God is as large as in charge as we can imagine, perhaps even more so than we imagine or think. So what do we mean then by theological field education? Well, first of all, let's start with that word field. It means that you're outside, that you are engaging context outside of Chicago Theological Seminary, that whether you are in Nebraska or Florida or Ohio and Wisconsin, wherever you are here in Chicago, that you are taking what you are learning in the classrooms here, and you're trying to see how does all this theory and these ideas, how does it help you to serve and to work with people and to be that critical presence with people in their times of crisis. And so the idea of theological field education is this kind of external component, that you are moving beyond what's happening here in the classroom, that you're moving beyond your experience here at the seminary and actually going out into the world, if you will, serve humankind. and to serve God's people. What do we mean by theological field education? Well, yeah, it's real places, real people, and in various contexts. And so you will perhaps serve at a church or a parish. You may serve at a church or a religious institution that is not of your own faith bringing, if you will. You'll meet diverse people from diverse places who are having different experiences. So it's where the rubber meets the road in many regards. You're taking what you're doing in the classroom, and yeah, you're taking it to the community. It's praxis, it's practical, it's hands-on, it's feeding those, it is serving in soup kitchens, it's community gardening, it's praying with people during times of difficulty, it's perhaps engaging in works of advocacy and justice. Yes, it's that hands-on experience, building your gifts, building your ministry competencies. It's one thing to talk about and to read about ministry, but it's another thing when you engage in ministry yourself. That idea, again, of theological field education. It's taking what you are learning inside the walls of Chicago Theological Seminary and taking them outside. And it's giving you a chance to reflect and, again, to think about who God is calling you to be and the many and various ways God is calling you to serve. What do we mean by theological field education? Yes, it's action, but it's also important that you take the time to sit and to think and to reflect, to have some me time, if you will, where you are contemplating, where you are processing, where you are trying to really get in touch with whatever it is that you've witnessed, whatever it is that you've been doing in your field placement sites, or whatever it is that you've been doing in the CPE environment. And so as you engage in these activities or these degrees of service, it's important that you take time to think and to reflect. And the more you think and reflect, our desire is that will sort of push you to go out and to do more action. And that the more action that you do, the more time that you reflect. So it almost becomes a cyclical process. That it's important that not only are you just engaging in activity, but you're beginning to think and to understand and to really discern what is the meaning or what are the meanings of the activity in which you are engaging. It's theological field, it's education. What are you learning through your various forms of service? What are you learning from your supervisors? What are you learning from your field placement environment? What are you learning from the CPE experiences? Not only what are you learning from the people, but what are you learning about yourself? What are you learning about what God is calling you to do? What are you learning about, again, how God is calling you to serve? It is theological. And by theological, you're trying to discern your own sense of God language or God talk. How are you understanding who God is? How are you understanding this sense of calling, this sense of vocation? It is also not just our understanding that God calls, but how do we answer? How do we respond? And how does the service that we're doing in these field placement sites help us to ascertain the ways in which we respond or the ways in which we answer God's calling? God calls, we serve, and we answer, then we serve. And we have this idea of service because we see God acting and moving in the world. And again, I think it's this sort of cyclical or circular response that the more we see God calling us, the more we answer, the more we serve, the more we see the world. And I think in the same regard, the more we also see God and God's moving and God's presence in a world that can be filled with so much crisis and so much pain and so much hurt. But how do we see God moving in many ways in a world that is often filled with a lot of joy and a lot of happiness, in which there's so much good in people, so much good in humankind? So this idea, theological field education, it's rooted in going outside. It's rooted in external experiences. It's education. What are you learning about God? What are you learning about yourself? What are you learning about the people whom God has created? What are you learning about creation as well? So there can be also ecological aspects to this. But it's also theological in that we take the time to reflect on who we are in God, and we take the time to reflect on who God is. Again, it is the rubber meeting the road. It is, yes, it's the Word incarnate, the Word made flesh. John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And so in many ways, how do we again take what we're doing in the classroom and sort of put, I guess, some meat to perhaps some of the skeletons or the bones that we have in the classroom setting? Not saying that what we're doing in the classroom is bone filled in any regard, but it's a matter of, for lack of a better analogy, how do we create this sort of total human experience and ways in which we see God moving and working and serving and using us to serve God's world. Well, let's get to some of the nuts and bolts, if you will. So now we have some general idea of what we mean by theological field education. More specifically, we have to discern then, well, what does that look like as we're matriculating through Chicago Theological Seminary? What does it mean then as you're an MDiv student? What does it mean if you are an MARL student? Well, a couple of things. If you're an MDiv student, then there are really two distinct requirements. Number one, MDiv students are required to do CPE. That is, they're required to do clinical pastoral education. There are some students who decide that they want to do CPE in their first year. There are others who decide that they want to do CPE after they've completed field education. Primary requirement for doing CPE is that you have to have 4 courses, and one of those courses has to be Introduction to Pastoral Counseling or the online version of Introduction to Pastoral Theology. And so you have to have completed a semester, basically a semester of courses, or 4 courses, if you will, to begin CPE. The second requirement for MDiv students is the field placement experience. And that is the experience where you will spend 400 hours or so in a community-based setting, in a parish setting, in a religious institution, in a social service agency. And so basically from September to May of an academic year, you will spend time learning and growing with a supervisor. You'll spend time working or serving in a particular field placement setting. So these are basically the 2 requirements for MDiv students. MARL students, you do not have to complete CPE, but you do have to complete the 400 hours of field placement. And we'll talk more specifically about field placement in our second module, and we'll talk more about CPE in our third module. You'll see here that at CTS, the options are indeed numerous. We have various options, and these are just some of the field placement sites. These are just some of the congregations or churches which we have a degree of partnerships, and these are just some of the opportunities that students can choose from as it relates to their field placement. But it's also important that you bring to our attention any social service agency, any community-based agency, any church or any congregation that you think would also be a good partner with us in this regard. And so yes, I have books and I have resources here in my office, but I also look to you to assist in identifying what you think would also be viable opportunities so that we can expand, if you will, the metes and bounds and expand our portfolio of institutions and agencies and organizations that can help our students in their theological field education process. And so you see here, we engage with chaplaincy organizations. If you're interested in social justice and advocacy, you may have an interest in music or drama or painting. And so one of the things that we want to do is also to research those organizations who they're maybe focused on drama or music or art, but we're also trying to see, are there ways in which there's a theological tenet or a theological stream, even as we approach drama or music or art. We're here at CTS engaging in interreligious dialogue. And so we'll have students from various religious backgrounds. And so we're very, very excited that we'll have the opportunity for students to have field placement, not just within Christian-based religious organizations, but also with students will have the opportunity to engage in conversation with our Muslim brothers and sisters and with our Jewish brothers and sisters as well. So the opportunities are growing, and we are excited about the many, many possibilities for engaging in theological field education here at Chicago Theological Seminary. And so you ask, well, where do I start? Where does it all begin? Well, start with your interests. Start with where you believe God is calling you to use your gifts. If you are good at theater and you're good at writing scripts, then, we need to find some place for you to use those gifts. So start with what you believe God is calling you to do and the gifts that you believe God has given you. That's one way to start as far as trying to discern your own sense of field placement. Stop by my office and talk to me. I'd love to speak with you as you begin to discern more your own sense of calling. I have a lot of resources here, but I'm always looking for additional resources, and I'm always going out trying to meet people, trying to forge relationships, and trying to make connections. So various institutions and organizations can partner with CTS in helping our students to be fully prepared and to be engaged as they indeed become what we call the next generation of leaders. You'll see that your learning covenant will be an important part of your work with theological field education. The leadership and ministry course, very integral. You'll also sign up for the field education course as well as you begin to think more about engaging in field placement during your second year, and as you also begin to think about completing your CPE unit, either the second semester of your first year, or again, some people just complete CPE during their third year. But what's important as you're beginning to think about field ed and as you're beginning to think about CPE, think of it in terms of the broader context of your entire education at Chicago Theological Seminary. Not just a class or something to do that you just check off your list and boom, it's done, it's over. But think of how these experiences in many ways could help to shape and inform your ministry 5, 10, 15 years from now. Again, I go back to my own example. I thought I was just going to serve at a church in Dayton, Ohio as a youth minister. But here it is many, many years later, there are people that I met as a seminarian who are a part of a core group of my advisors and friends, even to this day. And so the experiences that you will have in seminary now, the people that you will meet, these are people who will be your colleagues and your ministry or your friends, if you will, through the rest of your life. The field ed experience can be one of those formative experiences that will help you throughout the rest of your vocation, throughout the rest of your ministerial. Not only will you have an opportunity, particularly if you're an MDiv student, to engage in field placement, but you will also see that MDiv students are required to complete what we call CPE, or Clinical Pastoral Education. And there is a website, www.acpe.edu. That's the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. It's just a wonderful resource, a wonderful tool that has almost everything you need to know and some as it relates to your CPE experience. What I would advise you to do, take a few moments just to kind of look and see what you have, what's offered there. Go to the directory and begin to look at the accredited centers. And that's important because it's not just a matter of, well, here's a hospital or here's a nursing home or here's a place I want to do CPE. We want to make sure that you go through places that you have this experience at places that have been already quote unquote vetted by the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. And so again, whether you're in Florida or Ohio or Wisconsin or Nevada or wherever it is that you are, and again, that's the beauty of having a CTS online experience, that our students are all across the country. We even have a student in Paris. So wherever you are, check with the www.acpe.edu website and click on the accredited centers and begin to discern, well, what are the options that I have completing my CPE experience. And so again, you have them listed here. You have all these various regions. We have students who are in Texas and students in Florida. We have various opportunities, of course, in Chicago and in Nebraska. And so wherever you are, and in Ohio even, again, go to the website and check out the centers that are available for you. There is a process for completing and for applying to the CPE experience. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, calling someone and then that's the end of it, but there's a really extensive process. And so what I always recommend that, if you're thinking about doing CPE, say in the summer, which is a more intensive format, that it's best that you begin the application process in the November before you want to complete that process. If you're thinking about doing CPE in the fall, then my recommendation is that you start January and February applying to various CPE programs. So again, if you're thinking of doing an intensive CPE program in the summer, then I would recommend that you start in November prior to that summer, applying to different sites. And if you're thinking about completing CPE or starting your CPE program rather in the fall, then the previous January and February would be a good time to begin to look and to begin to discern what your options are. And so on this website, if you click on down to where it says membership fees and forms, then you click on the forms. Next thing you'll want to pay attention to is the CPE application. And you'll see the application PDF or DEC form. It may not hurt to go ahead and download it to begin to review the form before you actually start writing the questions. It's pretty extensive, so it may not hurt just to go ahead, download it, save it somewhere else, either on your hard drive or USB, so that you can, as you begin to complete it, you can save it and keep going back to it and save it and go back to it as you begin to gather the information you will need to complete the form. Several things that the form itself requires. So there's a biographical sketch, just some general information about you, where you've gone to school, your family background, where you were born, where you are at this stage in your life, in your career. You'll also have to answer questions about your own spiritual growth, your own spiritual development, questions about your own sense of calling and your vocational history. What do you believe God is calling you to do? What gifts and graces have you identified? How do you think God is calling you to use those particular gifts? CPE, it's clinical, it's pastoral, it's education. And so part of that essay that you will complete is related to, identifying a helping incident. One of the core aspects of CPE is that you are really working with people and serving with people and sharing with people during very critical, urgent times in their lives. There's a sense of urgency, a sense of emergency, if you will, where you will be called on to provide some degree of pastoral counseling, some sense of presence, some sense of prayer, being able to just stand or with people during moments in which they are just experience some degree of trauma or some stressful incident in their lives. And so you'll be asked to share any time that you have had to help someone in a particular situation. You'll also be asked to address your own impressions of CPE. What does it mean to you when you hear clinical pastoral education? And we'll talk more about CPE itself once we get to that third module. Some of the things that you should be prepared, to discuss as you begin to think about completing that 1 unit of CPE that's required for our MDiv students here at Chicago Theological Seminary. Please note on our website that there is also a tab that's directly related to field education. And so just a general overview of much of what I've discussed here is online. All of the forms that you'll need, the Learning Covenant forms, your mid-year evaluation, final evaluation. It also just gives you the rubric of what courses are required before you complete CPE, what courses are required, the matriculation process as you begin to think about completing field education. And so again, please don't hesitate to look at the website, and you'll see the various forms. You'll also see many of the various congregations and parish and community-based organizations that have already signed on to partner with CTS in the field education process, and we're continually adding